Hey, I'm Jackson Simpson, and today I'm going to be talking about the constraints in establishing underwriter policy. So, our book lists four main restraints: their financial capacity, regulation, personnel, and reinsurance. So, first, we'll look at the financial capacity restraint, and this is really the most important thing in understanding from an underwriter's perspective how much capacity they have to give out in the marketplace. And the key solvency ratio that regulators and insurers look at is the premium to surplus ratio, which essentially takes all your premiums written and divides that by your policyholder surplus. And think of policyholder surplus as the net worth of your insurer. And our book lists that 3 to 1 is considered too high for that ratio. But if you look right now, this is a graph from June of 2020. You can see that right now the industry only has $1 of surplus for every 75 cents of premium, which is the strongest claims paying status in history. So this means that right now insurers have a ton of capacity that they could employ out into the marketplace, but they just have not yet. And that's actually very surprising for me after hearing all about the hardening market that we're dealing with in P&C. It's kind of interesting that it's not a capacity issue. I'm sure there are various other factors that play into that, but surprisingly, capacity, the insurers actually have a lot to give out right now. So further continuing the capacity slide, there's the SAP, these statutory accounting principles, and these are the principles that insurers must follow when reporting financial statements. And they're more conservative than the general GAAP accounting principles used for other companies because we really need to protect insurer solvency because so many other full industries are reliant on insurers being able to pay the claims that they're responsible for. So obviously insurers look at return on equity like anyone else. This is just a profitability ratio for insurers. It takes net income over policy surplus. Your goal is to maximize that ROE with the capacity that you're able to give out. And so you do this by setting return thresholds. So let's say you're writing Nat Cat risk. If your Nat Cat division is less than a 4% ROE one year, maybe you'll discontinue that and move on to a different class. That's essentially what that's saying. Just focusing on the target business, so you're getting the most dollar of profit or the most profit for every dollar of capacity you're putting up. So moving on to regulation, that second point, there are many different ways that regulation affects how underwriters do business. I'm not going to read off all those bullet points, but one important one to see is that, or one that I think is very interesting, is that if insurance has not been adequately offered in a certain geographic region, regulators can require you to extend coverage to loss exposures that you wouldn't normally want to cover. An example of how this could happen, say that there's an insurer operating in Florida and they no longer want to cover tier wind. If the State Department feels that there's not enough tier wind insurance offered, then they can pull that insurer aside and say, hey, you have to at least offer Nat Cat or Cat tier 1 wind exposure to be able to continue providing other insurance lines in the state. Moving on to the next slide, if it'll click. Computer froze a little bit.